Hey there, we are Rob and Joanna Tigan. Welcome back to the Growing Home Together podcast. We've been married for over 30 years and we've parented our 5 kids through all the ages and stages. We're excited to share our passion for caring for the soul of your family with you. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Thank you so much, friends, for joining us for the Growing Home Together podcast today. You know, in this stage of life with our middle schooler, it is pretty clear what our job description is as his parents. I mean, he needs us to provide clean clothes and food in the fridge and some help with his homework. He needs us to drive him everywhere and pay for his schooling and his extracurriculars. And he needs us to take him to the doctor and make sure he wears his bike helmet. And Rob and I are his biggest cheerleaders and his guide as he's doing this work of growing up.
Yeah, that's right. But it is a whole different story as we're parenting our young adult children right now. We're having to tear up that old job description and learn a whole new way of relating together. And so today's guest is going to tell us, and often says, the transition is complicated, often messy, and can sometimes feel like you're walking on eggshells.
Yes, and that is why we're so glad to welcome Jim Burns to the show to share some strategies with us to create the adult-to-adult relationships that we've always wanted. Jim is the president of HomeWord, and he's the author of popular books, including Doing Life with Your Adult Children. Thank you so much, Jim, for joining us to share your insights today.
Well, Joanna, Rob, it's great to be with you. As I told you before we started the podcast, I sort of stalk you guys, love what you do. Tell people to go to your website, and I love your podcast. So it's an honor for me to be on the show talking about exactly what you said. I laughed when you said about a middle schooler, because our middle schoolers, we just needed them to change their underwear periodically, and we had to be aware of it. And then they got to become adults, and the issues were different.
Yeah, for sure. So, Jim, I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with your organization, HomeWord, and some of the great resources that you've written to encourage families. But for those who aren't, can you give us a little bit of background about you and your family and what led you to write Doing Life with Your Adult Children?
Sure. The ministry, HomeWord, has been around for 39 years. And we have 4 values: strong marriages, confident parents, empowered kids, and healthy leaders. So all of our content, all of that, what we do centers around one of those 4 areas. And my background is youth ministry. Cathy and I got married 1 week after college graduation, which we do not suggest for people to do. We've now been married 50 years. We say we have a high maintenance marriage. We're speaking this weekend on marriage. And we always these people look at us after we say we have a high maintenance marriage. They go, why are we listening to these people? Right? But we've made it, and we have 3 daughters. So we've had no hormones or drama, of course, in our life. And now they're adults. And, we've got 4 grandkids. We're living that life, and we actually love that life. And we love what goes on at HomeWord. HomeWord has some amazing resources. We're the largest provider of parenting seminars in the United States. I know you guys live up in Michigan. We get to Michigan quite a bit because we've got a number of speakers up that way, and then I get up there. So that's kind of HomeWord. That's our family. Both of us came from dysfunctional families, not Christian. So we became Christians in high school. That's why youth ministry is a big deal to us. When we became Christians, we both felt called to come alongside kids. And today we feel that the most effective way to still come alongside kids is to come alongside their parents and help those parents, because parents are, as you even, you guys write about this all the time and speak about it, but the parents are the primary disciplers, whether they know it or not. That's what's interesting. Mm-hmm. And so HomeWord has morphed over the years. We started out speaking a lot to youth workers and things like that. And then I wrote a book called Partnering with Parents in Youth Ministry. And it's funny, I don't know if it changed anybody else's life. It changed my life, because I went, I want to give the rest of my life to helping parents in that important area of their life, providing content, both in parenting and in marriage. So that's kind of where we go.
That's great.
Yeah, that's so good. And you're very relatable, because we also have 3 daughters, and we didn't even wait till we were done with college. We didn't wait a week. We got married in the middle because, we like doing everything the hard way.
People call me crazy. Is it okay, even though we haven't met personally and face to face, to say that was a little crazy for all of us?
Yes, for sure. For sure. And we're at 33 years. So, you're giving us hope.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And one time somebody said to me, what's the secret of your marital success? And I think they were looking for something on, spontaneity and romance and all this. And I said, perseverance. And I didn't mean that bad. Cathy said, oh, that sounds so unromantic. But the fact is, I think when couples persevere, do it right, John Ortberg, who's a friend of mine, says, love God and do the right thing. And I told him a few weeks ago, I said, hey, I've changed your quote. He goes, and it's like on posters, right? So you don't change those kind of quotes. And he said, what? And I said, yeah, love God, do the right thing, and repeat daily for the rest of your life, and you're going to be fine. And I think that honestly has some real significance to not only what we're going to talk about today, but also to our marriage and families, regardless of what age our kids are, or regardless of how long we've been married.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. Agreed. Yes. And, Jim, I got a kick out of the title of your first chapter in the book. You call it You're Fired. And we were hoping you could tell us, why is it so important that we let go of our old way of parenting once our kids grow up?
Well, our kids are going to change anyway. And so basically what we need to do is take the lead, I think, and give them the passport to adulthood. So if the bottom line, and this I've changed over the years as I even think about parenting the littles, but you're parenting to help them become responsible adults. So they're moving from dependence to independence. And so when they become adults, they're going to tell you they're adults, even though you're still paying for their cell phone, or you're helping them with insurance, or paying for college, or whatever it is. But what we have to help them understand is that, no, we're going to believe that you're going to act like an adult too. So we're fired. What I say, we're fired, not as a parent, but we're fired as a day-to-day parent, because when our kids become adults, they don't need us every day. And I've said that to moms and dads, and I've watched probably more moms than dads, but I've watched them cry. Like, what do I do now with my life? And we had that as our kids, as we were fired as a day-to-day parent, and they kind of fired us, frankly. It wasn't just us. It was them saying, you're not calling or not connecting or whatever, because we talked to them, we still talk to them every day almost. But what I realized was that if their life was going to change, our life needed to change. And I was thinking about Cathy, who's an amazing mom. And when the girls became adults, she was the sun, and they were the planets revolving around the sun in our home. I was kind of probably an add-on another planet as we're going around the home. And all of a sudden, she didn't feel needed because those planets weren't revolving around her anymore. And so it was really hard for her to give up day-to-day parenting, but it was also hard for her to jump into the empty nest, because both of those things kind of come oftentimes at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that was a wake up call for us. But the idea of being, fired means that we had to release them even when our kids weren't always making the best decisions, but release them. We had to release them to God and allow them to sometimes make some choices that we wouldn't make. And then we also had to deal with it in our own life by going, we're not defined by some of their choices, because really good parents have kids who make sometimes poor choices. So there's a lot to that being fired part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And, you mentioned 3 daughters, and I've got 3 as well, and they're all my young adults. So, and as they often say, it's the daughter is always dad's little girl, right? And I feel that, especially when it comes to protecting them, and sometimes it's just hard to let go. So what do you think are some of the reasons that parents have a hard time releasing their kids to independence?
Part of it is because they have been, you said the word independence, and they've been dependent on us. And yet if we keep doing it, Rob, we enable dependency on them, and that's not going to be good, because then they're going to have a fail to launch. They're going to feel entitled. But for us, we've been taking care of them. And just because they turn the magic 18 or whatever, that doesn't mean that they're not still your little girl. I was with 2 of my daughters this weekend a lot, and they're in their 30s. They're still my babies, and I love them like crazy, and I would do anything for them. And yet there's times when I just have to, kind of, as the subtitle of the book, sometimes I just have to keep my mouth shut. And I'm like, seriously, I have the answers. Just come and talk to me right now. Okay. But part of being fired is I have to wait for them to ask. And really, in being fired, you're not being fired as their parent. You're being fired, like I said, as the day-to-day thing, but you're also moving them from where you're sort of in charge and really to a place where now you're their mentor. And if you can move to that mentor thing, and that's on their time frame, not your time frame. And I don't even think you say, hey, I want to be your mentor. I think it just begins to move. And I thought about it this weekend because I said to Cathy, I had great conversations with Heidi and Christy. Becca, again, wasn't in town. But I said, I had great conversations with them. And they were saying, Dad, what would you do in this situation? And one of them's, in a work situation that she's trying to go through differently. And Christy was talking about some stuff that she's doing actually at our church. What would you do? And I was like, how cool is this? They're asking me, for my input, but they didn't do that earlier on. In those earlier years, in the adult years, they were literally trying to kind of move away from us. Christy she went to a Christian school. She wrote in the newspaper this is her senior year, she wrote talking about her life and faith at the school. And she goes, I had to disown my parents' faith to own my own. Well, that was kind of freaky because we didn't know all of that was going on because apparently she didn't think we were safe enough to talk about some of her fears and doubts. I mean, a little bit leaked out, but when she'd come home, she loved going to the church because it's all her friends were still there, right? But during her school, come to find out, she wasn't thrilled about going to 3 chapels a week, and she really wasn't hitting church as often as we thought she was hitting. To disown our faith, that's a strong word, but funny enough, we go to the same church now. She's probably more involved at church than we are. And, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, but she had to go through that time of owning it herself, whether it be faith, values, life. And sometimes as adults, when they get to that other side, if you would, they have different views than us. Like, this one, Christy has different views politically than we do. And so that's just one of those kind of topics that we just have chosen not to talk about. I'm just thrilled that she walks with God, but also we don't have the same opinions. And I've had to let that go. Cathy's had to let that go.
Yeah, I do love the subtitle of your book. In fact, we were podcasting the other day, and I mentioned it in that podcast because it's keep your mouth shut and the welcome mat out. Right. And that's a great subtitle. And honestly, that can be really hard, especially when our kids are making choices that we don't agree with, or like you said, some of they start forming their own opinions. So what advice would you give to parents on how they can speak to their kids and give advice to their kids, especially in those times when they're making choices you don't maybe approve of or that kind of thing?
And I don't have I said to a woman just the other day, her daughter had moved in with the boyfriend. And in fact, she grabbed me at church on Sunday. I said, does she know what you believe? Yes. Does she know how you feel? Yes. Okay. Now broaden the relationship because the way you're talking, it doesn't sound like this relationship is going to last. And when she crashes, she knows what you believe. She knows how you feel. So you don't have to make this the one topic that you talk to her about every day. So you're going to have to broaden the relationship and still keep in relationship because not if she crashes, but when she crashes, you want her crashing toward home. Toward you. So I'm not opposed to people never having a conversation. They are going to have to understand that when you give unsolicited advice, and that's actually the second principle in that book, if you give unsolicited advice, they're going to take it oftentimes as criticism. And it's just remarkable to me because I go, my advice is pretty good. I even have a story in the book about giving Christy some advice. And she goes, not now. And I'm like, wait, I get paid to give people advice. You don't want any advice. Give me a break, right? But the point being is that we do have to be careful. So yeah, I don't have a problem if we say, boy, we have some concerns here. There's some flags, and it's the hardest thing in the world to say, here's some flags, and they go, well, thanks for talking, and now I'm going to keep doing it. That's they're adults. They're going to choose that, and then you get into tough love because tough love isn't being mean. Tough love says you allow the consequences of their poor choices to teach them that there's a better way.
I think that's good advice. And it's kind of like what you were talking about earlier in the program too, about that perseverance piece. That's what Joanna and I always remind each other is that we're in this for the long haul. And is this one conversation, is it going to set us back or is it going to move us forward? And sometimes keeping our mouth shut is the best option if we're thinking long-term, the relationship we want to keep with our kids and the open door we want to keep with our kids. So.
Rob, I'm taking notes on you because that's a really good comment. Is this going to move this relationship forward or is it going to move it backwards? Sometimes even the right advice can move it backwards. So that's where, again, there's times when we have to just simply bite our tongue. I mean, we're talking on audio, we're not talking on video. So I could show you the scars on my tongue from biting my tongue, give them, different advice. I mean, even this morning, so my daughter, Christy, lives by us. Her husband is coming back from Japan today. So we have been double duty morning and afternoon picking him up. She's a teacher. And so I drove over to Christy's house to help Christy so she didn't have to drop the kids off at our house to take them to school, which is, I've done it now for the last 10 days. It's been a blast. And I get there on time. I get there early. And Christy hadn't fed them breakfast. Charlotte, who's 6, was crying because 2 socks were different. And Christy just said, wear those socks. And I'm like, we got to go find the same socks, that kind of a thing. So I was like, Christy, in my head, the bubble says, Christy, you should have got up 10 minutes early. So you could have got them together because now they're going to be late. You're a teacher. You can't be late. But I just became the fun grandpa and did what we could. I said, we'll make them some toast. That's all they had for breakfast. And I said to my wife on the phone, because I was going on to work, and I said, I think they're going to be hungry when you pick them up, because I didn't see any, they can get lunches at school, but I said, I didn't see a whole lot of breakfast, and I have no idea what they're going to eat for lunch. Then she said, oh, well, I already promised them I'd get ice cream right after. So I go, well, that's a good meal. But you see what I'm saying? I mean, I wanted to say to my daughter, dudette, we've been doing this now for 10 days minus Steve. Steve handles it usually. You can't get it together still. And I'm not burning on Christy. She's an amazing mom, and I get it. It's with a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, life's chaotic. But I did have a lot of advice that I just kept my mouth shut on. And I think that worked very well today.
Oh, that's good. And sounds like those grandkids are in good hands too. Yeah. I remember when our oldest son was an RA at his college, and one of the other students' moms was really upset because our son Josh couldn't give her access to her son's grade report. There's rules about that. So she wanted to check up on her son to see if he was doing his homework and passing his classes. And instead of trusting in the professors to hold her son accountable, she wanted to do it. And I think that just kind of taps into this struggle that all of us can have to let our kids actually fail on their own. So why is it so important that we do that? And really in the day-to-day, what are some practical ways to let it happen?
Yeah, well, for one thing, I mean, think about when your kids were 5. I mean, we were in the protection business, but, they skinned their knee, they burnt their finger on something. They did it once. They kind of learned. I mean, I think my kids skin their knees more often than once, but, you kind of learn from it. And so really, when we do our kids' homework, when we're always checking up on them, when we make their pediatrician appointment, some lady said, I can't believe it, I still have to take my 22-year-old, I have to still give him make his pediatrician appointments. I'm like, wait, that's weird on 2 levels. One is he's still going to a pediatric doctor. 2, you're making his appointments. But, I felt that way. I mean, Becca quit wearing she had braces. So we'd spent $5,000 on braces, and she just quit wearing the retainer because she didn't like it. And I'm like, oh man. But the deal was, if her teeth went bad, that was going to be her problem. Now we weren't going to be paying for it. So I really think it's better. We teach them to become adults, and most of us learn by our mistakes, or we learn by our failures or whatever, a lot more than we learn by our successes. But if you've done it right, then your kids will learn from some of those failures. And I'm not talking about huge drug addiction issues, or if kids in the adult world have mental health issues and things like that. That's kind of a different story than what we're talking about. But I think we just have to allow them to do that. And, we so many of us were the parents, the helicopter parents, and we have other descriptions, but, it's time to land the helicopter and just shake your head and go, okay, I can't believe that's happening, but we're going to let them that's going to happen. But at the same time, keep the relationship open, because when your kids do skin their knees as adults, it's a bigger skinned knee experience. But, they're going to come back to you if you're that person who's been safe with them. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And, last night, even with our youngest, and he's not even a young adult yet, I had kind of fallen into that bossy mom mode for part of the evening. Sure. It was one of those days. At bedtime, we were talking, and what came out of that was he couldn't perceive my little helpful reminders as being helpful or concern. He internalized that as a lack of confidence in him.
Yes,
So is that part of what comes into play with our young adult kids is in that effort to help. We say, we don't think you can handle it.
Yeah. I always say to parents, 98, 99%, you giving them advice or, pushing on them in that way is actually the right advice, and it's good advice. Your intentions are great. They're taking it that you don't believe I'm all grown up. And so even like take your middle schooler, when you start thinking about, teaching them responsibility, because in middle school, of course, that's a huge, part of our job descriptions, and teach our middle schoolers responsibility. So what we do is we give them an expectation. And if they don't have the expectation, instead of just continually going, there's probably a consequence. And then you hand them their expectation right back and say, buddy, I think you can do this. You didn't this time, but I think you can do it. Now, again, we're going to have a consequence if you don't get it done. And then you almost are showing empathy, because you're like going, I'm so sorry that you don't have your phone, or you can't go to soccer practice, or you're off the computer for any game, whatever it might be. But I believe in you. I think you can do it. And I think it's possible for us to help them become more responsible by believing in them than by, nagging didn't work. I mean, it didn't work, for us if our parents were nags. It didn't, negativity and nagging, just doesn't work as well. It doesn't work in marriage. It doesn't work, with our kids. There are times when you have to a middle school, you have to say, hey, like I said earlier, did you change your underwear this week? Or, boy, wash under your arms because they're starting to smell or whatever. But I think there's also times we just have to say, no, I believe you can do this. And so you had a failure, you had a slip, you need a course correction here, buddy. What would you do next time? That sounds so simple, Joanna, when it's so hard in the midst of the battle. I get it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. And it is in the adulting part too, which is why it's great to have your helpful resource here for sure. I think one of the unique sources of pain for Christian parents is when their adult kids also turn away from the faith or in the church. And that can stir up so many different fears for our kids, and also guilt as parents. Like, did we fail as a mom and dad, that kind of thing. So what kind of encouragement or advice can you offer parents in that situation today?
Well, you're right. And I'd say it's one of the number one things I get. I'm speaking, 40, 50 times a year on this subject. And when they come afterwards and want to talk, just like when you guys are doing stuff like that, what they want to talk about is their kids straying from their faith. I don't have easy answers, but I do want to say you're not alone, because right now, the latest statistic, and I'm getting this from pretty good resources, and it's a terrible statistic for people like you and me who do this job, but about 65% of kids who, when they graduate from high school, will not go to church the next year, at least very often. Especially if they moved out, or they go into the military, they're in college, they're away, whatever. Even if they were homeschooled, if they were, any of the, Christian schools, whatever it is, it's amazing. However, there's about a 300% better chance, so says George Barna and Richard Ross out of a seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. There's a 300% better chance that they will stay in the church if there are faith conversations in the home. So that's good news for those of us who still have, not me, because I'm on to the grandkids, but in those with healthy, positive faith conversations, again, not toxic, not preachy, but something more normal, they tend to do a lot better. However, when they do stray, and there's some reasons behind that, but when they stray, they basically go through a process. And the process isn't that they go from I love Jesus to I don't believe in God. Now, some do, of course, but few. They've kind of gone through a part where they basically first just start drifting, and they've kind of strayed away from the basics. And it was that great football theologian, Vince Lombardi, the coach of the Green Bay Packers, who said, when you've strayed away from the basics, you've gone a long ways toward defeat. And so if kids aren't hearing the word of God, if they're not worshiping, if they're not praying, if they're not having any kind of personal spiritual disciplines, then that's where they start to drift. And you drift so long, you kind of look up one day and you're kind of lost. And that's when you begin to forfeit your spiritual purpose by being disobedient. And when you look at young adults, a lot of them, if they have walked away from God, it's because they have walked away from the morals and the values of a biblical worldview. And so they only have two choices. One is to come back, or two is to go, well, there must not be a God because I want to live my way, and I don't want to now believe what the Bible says. So they're going to choose the voice of culture, which changes on a regular basis, as opposed to the voice of authority, which is the scripture. And I think that's one of the things. However, on a positive note, what we see happening, and it's really not research documented yet, it's just starting because people are just starting to do it. I'm thrilled that they're doing it, is we see a lot of the young adults come back. Interesting enough, they're not saying they're coming back because they go, our pastor is a great speaker. They're coming back for community because of social media and because of so many other things. They don't have good community, and they remember the community they had when they were in the youth group or when they're in children's ministry, right? So they come back once they get married. They've kind of meandered toward responsibility. They've meandered toward marriage even. But once they get married and once they make babies, it brings them back to this love that they had for God earlier, especially if they're in community. So what we've got to figure out with young adults is they don't have to go to our church, but what you want them to do is find community of believers. Our daughter Heidi just was telling me that she's involved in an online MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers. And I just think that's the funniest thing because to me, MOPS, which I speak at their international convention sometimes, the beauty of it is sitting around a table. It's not the speaker person who comes. It's the amazing, community that these women have and talking about, their life. And she's on an online MOPS. And I said, is that as helpful? Because she's spoken at some MOPS with me. She goes, no, it's not as helpful, but it's all I can do right now. So she takes an hour out of her, and I think it's only an hour out of her work schedule to go and do it. So, she knows the need. It's harder for them to find that. Mm-hmm. So that's, I don't know if I went all over the place on that question, Rob, but I really do think that there is some good hope, and there are some things that we can do. And part of it is to be consistent with our own life and not preachy at them, because they don't want to get preached at. They don't want lectures. But, when they come to our house, we're going to pray before dinner. And our kids I look at our kids and I'm just like so grateful because they're making smarter decisions. But, some obviously have kids who are, against that. But, pray at your house. We said Heidi doesn't go to our church. She lives in LA, but Sunday she stayed overnight Saturday night with her two kids. We said, do you want to go to the 8:30 service or the 10? We didn't really say, don't come. Now, again, if she would have said, hey, I don't want to come, there's nothing we could do or would have done. But she goes, oh, I'd love to. Let's go to the 8:30 and then we can go get food. Okay. That's her love language. So she went, she loved it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think it's, again, goes back to just the encouragement that if you keep the welcome mat out, if they're kind of twisting and turning and processing going through the process of growing up, they haven't necessarily left forever. So keep praying and keep the door open.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's the long run. And basically, even when they're really blowing it, when we have if you have an adult child who's just, making some really poor choices, the bottom line is, do you still love me? And I think that's the question they have for you. I know I'm going against your values. I know I'm going against your morals. I know you and Mom love Jesus a lot more than I'm showing right now in my own life, but do you still love me? And I think that's really important. And Jesus led with love. Jesus showed kindness. He didn't show a lot of kindness sometimes to the hypocrites who were the leaders in the synagogue, but he showed a lot of kindness to sinners. And so we have to sometimes look at our kids like that. And, even when our kids were younger, when I was going to seminary a bazillion years ago, I was the area director for Mid-New Jersey Young Life. And we had kind of a phrase, earn the right to be heard, love on these kids. Because we were working with non-Christian kids a lot of times. And Cathy and I used to say, we need to treat our own children, like we treated the Young Life kids. And, there were still boundaries, but at the same time, we needed to, be their greatest cheerleader. I even have in my office, I have a little, I guess you could call it a little poster type thing. And it said, every young person needs at least one adult who is irrationally positive about them. And I think I took that all the way back from my youth ministry days. It's now, I think about it more with my own kids. And last Christmas, Heidi was in town and she needed to scan something, and her parents were, dumb and couldn't figure out how to scan with she goes, well, you have a scan. It looks like you have a scanner on the printer. And I go, yeah, I've never scanned on our printer. So we went into the office. She comes into my office. She'd been in it 100 times. And she goes, oh, I love that quote. She goes, Dad, you're that person for me. And she didn't see my eyes well up with tears because I don't know that I was always that person with her. I mean, she was the one who, colored outside the lines, and she made some choices in college that were kind of silly in my opinion. Today, I want to be that person who I'm irrationally positive about her because I think I can get more insight into her life and more love and more faith into her by doing it that way than as opposed to just nagging at her. Yeah. As much as I'd like to do that at times.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. What would you say to the parent whose child seems to maybe resist that independence or is failing to launch as an adult? Kind of the opposite of that.
No, we're seeing a lot of that right now. It's interesting you bring that up because we see a lot of kids who are like, they're not getting their driver. I got my driver's license on the day I wouldn't go to school until I got my driver's license at age 16. In college, I would forget to call, we didn't have cell phones then, but I would forget to call my parents on Sunday afternoon, even though I was calling collect, I was that kid. I was like, launch, boom, I'm gone. I mean, in a bad way, but today we have kids who don't even want to get their driver's license. They want to be taken care of by mom and dad. And I think we have to really develop some expectations that if you talked about boomerang because you had a boomerang in your life. I think when they become adults and they come back into our house, or even if they're in college and they come back just for the summer or for other times, I think it's important to have expectations and say, here's what we expect. And if it's too long, they live with you, then I think we've got to help them, figure out how to launch. Now, if my book, Doing Life with Your Adult Children in Spanish, doesn't talk as much about that because in the Spanish-speaking world, typically you live at home until you're married. So if you're 38 years old and you're not married, you're still going to live with mom and dad. I'm not going against cultural things. I'm just saying that in our world, especially in the United States, there are times when we have to help them launch by saying, hey, if you're going to live here, then we expect you to have a job. We expect you to pay us some rent. Now with Rebecca, our middle child, we took rent from her. It was $100, so it was not going to kill her. She didn't really even gripe about it. And she was getting her master's in clinical psych. And so when she graduated and she moved out on her own, we handed her the money back. And she went, what are you guys doing? We go, no, this will help you for your apartment and, all this kind of stuff, because we didn't want the money. We wanted her to be responsible. And we didn't have to have that with our kids, like it's time to go. But a lot of people have to have, I think, the conversation, what is best for them and not what's best for you, because we want to, like you say, Rob, with these daughters of ours, oh my goodness, the dads, we want to take care of them and we want to baby them. And, I hear about parents who are still making their adult children's beds. We have to help them launch by giving them expectations and literally sitting down, never in the heat of the battle, but sitting down and saying, okay, so what are the expectations now that you're an adult, and helping them have an exit strategy, even if it's long-term exit strategy.
Right. Yeah. One memory that has really stuck with me is a few years ago, one of our young adult kids had been away for a long time and then moved home and then was figuring out kind of where they were going to go from there. They were going through some stuff, and those next step decisions were kind of complicated, and we saw them kind of shut down for a while. And Rob ended up going to that child and stating those expectations that you're talking about. Like, you do need to step into a job and you do need to contribute some rent to the household and that kind of thing. And, you're kind of nervous. Am I pushing them too hard, or are they going to take this wrong or whatever? And her response kind of blew us away, because the word that she used was to the effect of, you just gave me my dignity back, and that was really powerful, because those expectations actually sent a different message than we had expected.
Yeah. And see, it was done not in the heat of the battle. Where we do it is like, you're going to have to get out of here and you need to be out of here in 2 weeks. You're driving us nuts or whatever. That's not giving them dignity. Dignity says, what would be a helpful plan to get you, started, get you on your own? And I know you haven't decided what you want to do with, do you want to go back to school or, the work, you don't have the perfect job or whatnot, but obviously you want to, I know, become a responsible adult. How can we help you? What can we do to help that? And listen to them. And a lot of times they'll come up with some really good ideas. To be honest, it's crazy if it's not in the heat of the battle. And then say, here's some things we thought. I think that works a lot longer. Again, parents sometimes are the ones who are enabling dependency. I tell a story in the book about a kid named Sean, came into my office. He graduated from UCLA, got great grades. The family had money. So they then let him spend 3 months in Europe, which, sounds like a great thing. The kid had a great time. He came back and he just, he was getting up at 1. He was a vegan. And so his mom made a meal for him and then a meal for mom and dad. And they were so mad at this kid. The dad, in deep frustration, looks at me, points at Sean and goes, Sean has a problem. And I looked at the dad and the mom and I said, actually, I think Sean has a great life. You guys are taking care of him. I said, I think you have the problem in a really good way. And I wish I could always say that helped. But we sat down and did a plan together. And you know what? I think it gave Sean some dignity. And Sean was out of there they wanted 3 months. And I think he was out of there within 6 and became responsible. And I'm not saying that he's wearing a coat and a tie and, has cut his hair to look all conservative or whatever. But, he really has become a responsible person who frankly loves music and is now a part of a worship team at their church. Well, how cool is that?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And I was hoping that we could dig into that money piece a little bit because like you're saying, that financial support can just backfire by enabling their dependence. So what are just some practical guidelines to follow to help our kids get to be smart with money and move into that place of supporting themselves?
First of all, 76, 78%, and these are later, I'm not even sure I have that number in my book, but 76, 78% of parents have helped their adult children. So if you're feeling like your adult children are kind of the money pit, you're not alone. But I think part of it is to help them move from dependence to independence, and you're not going to do that by just handing them everything. I really think that we have to teach them about stewardship and, good stewardship. Most kids, as parents, like I just have a book that just came out called A Student's Guide to Sexual Integrity. And I'm talking about parents. Talk to your kids about sex. All studies show the more positive, value-centered sex education kids receive from home, the less promiscuous and less confused they'll be. Most of those parents didn't get it. So you know what I mean. So I'm also saying, though, parents, teach your kids good stewardship. Teach them how to handle money. Teach them. I know a family that at age 16, all 3 of their kids were responsible for helping pay bills, not out of their own bank account, but out of the parents' money, but taught them how to do that. That was a great idea. They talked about where they gave money to, how they saved. They went through all that kind of stuff. Well, they're teaching them about stewardship. So I think that's one of the things that our young adults need from us because they honestly don't know. We've been taking care of that. So why do we think that all of a sudden they're going to become responsible? So I was talking to one of my daughters early on. They wanted to do this. They wanted to buy a bicycle that was like almost $1,000 on credit. And I said, well, let's look at compound interest. Do you know what that is? And they go, no. And I said, well, I didn't, when I was your age, know what that is either. I learned the hard way. So I said, if you buy this bike, here's how much the bike is. And I think it was $850, like fancy bike. And and then I said, but if you do this over this time thing, look at this. It's almost $3,000. She goes, that's gross. She was all mad at the bike company or whatever. I go, no, the poor decision would be you. Now, why don't you save up your money? And if you still want that bike, fantastic, but you may not even want the bike. Well, guess what? She never wanted the bike. She never bought the bike. And she understands compound interest now and how that's not a really great thing for being a good steward. She wouldn't have known that if I didn't give her that. And I'm just telling you, I didn't do a good job with my kids in their teen years because, we gave them allowance. And we did certain things well. Like for our girls, we gave them money for clothes each semester. And that's all they got from us. And, they'd have to figure it out. One of the daughters went to Target and bought 5 outfits and was happy. The other daughter went to Nordstrom's, the fancy, store, and bought a half of an outfit. And then she complained the entire year because she had shoes, but she didn't have any new tops, right? So, they have to learn. But we didn't give them more money.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, we've talked about this throughout the program, but something I really value in your book is this spirit of keeping the door open. Yeah. So our kids know that they're loved and they're valued all the time, even when we disagree, even when we don't agree with all their choices. So can you help us? What are some best ways to stay connected with our kids and continually convey that love message?
Yeah. Well, I think the beautiful way, if they'll allow this, is to, on a regular basis, if they're far away, be in touch with them. It's amazing, FaceTime, stuff like that can now happen. And I find also that, there's certain times in the year where, like, I have a good friend, and the mom, his wife, they have a daughter who's in college, and they do a shopping spree in New York every 2 months. And they call it a shopping spree. I don't know what that means, but they go into New York and they have fun, and, they take the train, and they actually have an overnighter, and they go, what? The woman said, I've never been closer to my daughter. I can't see her all the time like I used to, but that's a pretty proactive, cool thing to do. I mean, my kids are in their 30s, married with kids. I still have a date with them once a month. So nobody is saying no to, food. Now, for me, that means I get up at like 5:15. I drive to LA. I go out to breakfast with Heidi because she's an early riser. Becca's by that time at work. And then at lunch, I have lunch with her, and then I drive home. So, I mean, that's a lot of time. You know what? Most of the time, we have amazing conversations. Sometimes we just talk about snowboarding and life and, whatever. And I'm like, oh man, I took away time from work and whatever. I'm still saying those are some of my best times. And they were when my kids were, we had weekly dates. These are nuts. I mean, I was crazy on this, but I did it around food. They wanted food. So I would take them out, and they saw their mom and me having a weekly date. So, I had times with them. And again, mainly it was around food. With Cathy, it's always around nicer food, not like fancy food, but nicer food. With the girls, it was mainly around junk food.
Yeah, I agree with you that, in some ways, as you connect with your old adult children, it's even more fun in some ways than with their kids, because you can, connect on mutual hobbies and it's always good food around it. And
lots of concerts in your case.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, hey, the concerts that Cathy and I have been to, you would not believe, supporting, one of our son-in-laws, and it keeps the relationship open. When you said, what are suggestions? I just gave two bizarre ones, New York, shopping and whatever, but I'm just saying it's the little things. Mm-hmm. So, just the other day I had time with Becca, and again, she and Heidi live almost next door to each other in Los Angeles, right by Hollywood. And I said, I was with her, and I said, so, how is it going? And she goes, I've been wanting to talk to you about something. And she kind of had an agenda. She goes, you always had an agenda with me, Dad, like when I was growing up, which is totally true about Becca. And she said, so she pulls out, she has like 3 questions. She pulls out a little note card, and I'm just laughing my head off, because I had a note card usually in my pocket for these kids to ask. And sometimes I'd get to it and sometimes I wouldn't. But she had a note card. She wanted to run 3 things by me. Awesome. Other times with her, we just sit and laugh, and she shows me a new reel on some comedian that she likes, and you get on their territory. You spend time with them. It's for the long run.
Right. And I like what you're saying. What I'm hearing is kind of let your kids take the lead on what kind of quality time means the most to them. And that's kind of fun, because that's even a way to kind of get to know your kid better as they are an adult. I like that.
No, I think that's really true. As adults, when they move out and their life fills up with new and fresh experiences, then our job is to also have new and fresh experiences in our own personal life. And this is when we have some more time to be able to do that, but also, to move into their world. We who have a ministry background, we see them on their territory. My goodness, I just saw a man who has to be 62 or so, and he was a volunteer youth worker for me, and he was in a machine shop, and I saw him last week, and he said, do you remember the time, when I was, kind of just out of college, and I was working in my dad's machine shop, and you came in, you took a tour, and then you went to lunch? To be honest, that meant very little to me way back. I mean, that was 40 years ago. He still saw that as an important thing. Well, if he saw that as an important thing, think about our kids when we, go onto their territory.
Yeah, that's good. And, I am thinking about the mom or dad listening today who is just ready to run out the door and have that quality time, but maybe they're at a place in their relationship with their young adult child where that door has just been slammed shut entirely. Yeah. And I'm hearing more and more about this trend of young people deliberately estranging from their parents. Yeah. So what would you tell the mom or dad who's in that situation where their kid just seems completely out of reach?
Yeah. Well, the latest statistic as of last week is 27% of adult children are estranged from at least one family member.
Wow.
That's crazy. And a lot of times it's not coming from the parents, but it's coming from the kids. So when you look at younger millennials and when you look at Gen Zs who are, at a place where they could be estranged, it's so crazy. So what I say to parents, and I get this question all the time, and what I say to parents is, this is not the time to argue. This is not the time to try to fix your kids. It's actually the time to tiptoe back into the relationship by actually putting them in disequilibrium and not even trying to talk about whatever it is. A lot of parents say, I don't even know why there's estrangement. I turn my head on that sometimes. Well, sometimes they do. No, they just don't want to admit that. Or it's because, one was the election. Oh my gosh, it's coming up. And so, the kid's a Democrat and they're Republicans or vice versa. And they're trying to fix that. No, do not do that. Just simply do two things. One is keep the relationship open if you can. Also, serve them. So, send them a card, I love you, and give them a $25 Starbucks card or whatever their love language is. Leave it at that. And that means eventually they'll come back into the relationship. But for a lot of us, we want to barge into an estrangement situation. And I think we need to tiptoe into it. And I've been suggesting this for a number of years now. I've been suggesting this, and I'm getting a lot of good results from people who are saying, thank you so much. I just kept my mouth shut. I came alongside them. I just got an email from somebody who the parents said they just kept giving gifts to their grandkids and but being positive. And finally, one time they just said, any chance we could get coffee, as long as we don't talk about whatever, has caused this estrangement, I'd just like to see your face. And they went, oh, okay. And then they said, this was the hardest thing in the world. They wanted to talk about the estrangement. They didn't. And then the person said, hey, why don't you come over to so-and-so's game? They took off work to go do that because they were in the same not the same city, but the same area, the same county, and they had not seen their grandkids. So again, I don't know now that they're best friends, but I'm saying the person opened it back up because they now became safe. The question you have to ask is, why am I not safe? A lot of times it's the parents who've been preachy, lectury, or telling them that they should become a quote unquote Republican or a Democrat, whatever it is.
Right, right. Yeah, that's good. That's helpful.
Well, Jim, I'm sure there are moms and dads listening who, want to feel that connection with their kids and want to grow in that relationship with their adult kids. So I'm wondering if you could just spend a few minutes praying for them and their relationship with their kids, just to encourage them right now.
Absolutely. That would be an honor. I would love to. Let's pray together. Lord, thank you so much for being a parent. And Lord, it is the greatest joy, and it brings the greatest joy. It brings the greatest struggles as well. And I pray, God, that for that mom and dad who have maybe adult kids or even kids who are making that transition from the teen to adult years, and it's not going as easy. I pray, God, that first of all, they would lean on you and they would understand that you care for their children more than they even care for their children. And give them reassurance that as they persevere, that there is great hope and that there are plans, that they are your plans, not always our plans. And Lord, also help us to relinquish our children to you. As we relinquish them to you, then I think sometimes that's when the real work can be done. We know that you're doing a work even outside of our life. I pray for the parents who feel defined by their kids' poor choices, that they would know that you love them and that they are not defined by their kids' poor choices. I pray also for people who are estranged. I know we've only barely touched that surface, but people who are estranged, that, Lord, you would give them wisdom and insight on how to do that. And as your scripture says so clearly, where there's no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. I pray that you would give them wise counsel and wisdom. Thank you for people like Rob and Joanna and their incredible ministry, and where they disciple and nurture people to become more effective and help families succeed. And I just pray for them as well. So thank you for this time. Thank you for our children. And thank you for the privilege it is to have them on loan from you so that we can love on them. And yet we know that the ultimate love and the ultimate care and the ultimate sacrifice comes from you. And we are so grateful for that, even when there's tough times. We pray this in the name of Jesus. And we all say in our hearts, amen.
Amen.
Yeah, and I know a lot of our friends listening are going to want to get a hold of this book, Doing Life with Your Adult Children. Keep Your Mouth Shut and the Welcome Mat Out. And it really is a great resource. And the 9 principles that you have in here are very timely in this season. And then I know that people are going to want to check out all the other thousands of resources you mentioned as well. So where can people best get a hold of you online?
Well, they can go to HomeWord, HomeWord.com. And that's our website. That has all the cool stuff we do. And also, it has resources, or they can go to Amazon and look at least our book resources. Yeah, we have a great podcast too. I know we've asked you guys to be on it. We want you soon. And it's called HomeWord with Jim Burns. We have another podcast out of Indiana with Paige Klingenpill called Embracing Your Season, Parenting the Littles and Understanding Teens. And she's killing it. We've been doing these podcasts for now a year. It's become a major part of our life. We have a YouTube channel that has 1 minute from great people, not just me. So I'm a minor part of that, but some great parenting people where, I've just laughed when I say to people, how do you get help? And they go, well, I go to Siri and I go, how do I discipline my 10-year-old? When your name came up, I'm like, I'm not sure that's the best idea on how to find content. Find some great content that's trustworthy. But, our YouTube channel is really cool too. So lots of good stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to put links to those in the show notes so everybody can find them really easily. That's so great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, great to talk with you guys. I finally got to do this. I'm so excited to get to hang out with you. So thank you for what you do so very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's great having you.
And thank you, friends, for joining us on the Growing Home Together podcast today. Rob and I would love to connect with you over on our website at growinghometogether.com. We've got all kinds of resources to help you connect as a couple, to spend time with the Lord as a couple, and to pray for your kids. And we would love to share with you our resources of powerful prayers for your daughter and powerful prayers for your son, so we can take all those daily issues that we're concerned about for our kids and just leave them in God's hands and watch Him work. At Growing Home Together, we're caring for the soul of your family.
And growing home together with you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Growing Home Together podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and found some valuable insights to help you care for the soul of your family. Remember to check out growinghometogether.com for more resources. And stay tuned for our next episode coming your way soon.